So welcome to another video from theplayersaid.com. My name's Alexander.
And I'm Grant.
And today we are at WBC 2022 with Dan Bullock, who has designed 1979 Revolution Iran, and he designed No Motherland Without, which are a couple of games that we played and enjoyed. CDGs on very different and unique topics. And we just thought we'd kind of sit down, have a chat about some of the upcoming projects that you've got, and kind of where those are at, and what things we can look forward to in the future as well.
And I do want to point one thing, though. Dan has a wardrobe similar to Alexander's, so I think Alexander feels right at home. And
oh yeah,
there's solidarity.
Yeah, there's solidarity. Yeah. Stand together.
So
let's
let's talk about In the Shadows that we've got here.
Yeah, so this is a project that's currently on the P500 right now. It is made the cut. It is my co-design with Joe Schmidt, Chris Bennett. It plays 1-2 players. The solitaire is very different from the 2-player game. It's a very unique experience. Joe Schmidt, really, the solitaire is his baby. He did a great job with it. I had no hand in it, so you can be confident it's very good. For the 2-player game, however, one player plays the resistance and the other player plays the occupation. So it's both German forces occupying France and collaborating French forces. So we kind of thought it was important to have a solitaire element for that, for folks who weren't comfortable playing as the occupation. I know in my game group, I'm given the deplorable side to play in every single conflict.
Oh,
yes. I have no issue with it, but for plenty of folks, I can see that being a problem. So this game's a little different than some of our other CDGs because it operates with, it's still got events and points, but it also operates with suits. Mm-hmm. And the suits kind of illustrate some of the command restraints of, for example, for the occupation, it's a matter of not necessarily knowing the lay of the land in given areas, whereas for the resistance, like when you're trying to play a card with points in one suit and activate units in another, it has a little bit more to do with how various resistance groups didn't necessarily work as one cohesive whole. They had their own goals and objectives, and it wasn't really until the CNR was formed there was some collaboration there. So, so this game is part of the Lunchtime series, and theoretically would be playable in 30 minutes once you know it. I think the first play would probably be a little bit closer to an hour. But yeah, the three of us tried to make a game with as tight, like just as dense of decisions that you'd have to make for a lunchtime game. We just wanted it to be really thick. Like the way they get 12 eggs into a creme brulee. It's always like, how did they do that? Just a clown car of like substance is basically what we were hoping for.
So, and you guys did this at the Consim Game Jam in 48 hours, right? At least got the basic concept.
Very bare bones, and it was, it was very different. So that version, for example, had the coin pieces and all the...
From Falling Sky.
From Falling Sky. The world limitations I brought. Yeah.
This is the map.
There's Gaul.
Yeah, so this is our prototype map. But Joe Schmidt will not allow a prototype to not be pretty, so that's nice.
And good for him for that, too.
I love that, because I can't let that rest either. So right after we finished our Constant Game Jam version, a lot of changes were implemented, in part because as we were reading more sources about historical material, we wanted to change things to reflect what we had learned. And most importantly, to me at least, I think that we had a historical model that kind of better represents what we wanted to get players to get out of this game. And then we also had initially, for that weekend, created a game that used dice to resolve a lot of things. And we changed that to an asymmetric game where we had this deck of resolution cards that actually allowed us flexibility of using cards to resolve actions, but it gave us a little bit more of a breadth of like kind of dramatic events or different degrees of failure beyond what a die roll might be able to represent.
Right.
Basically, I didn't play it until after we had designed this game, but it kind of reminds me a little bit of like how in Combat Commander it's like, oh, I succeeded, oh, I failed, sniper, you know what I mean? Oh, an event.
Yeah, you may have succeeded at something, but it triggers something else. And that might not be good or it might be.
So it was a nice touch of having something where, say, the resistance was attempting to, say, ambush like a police patrol or something like that. And then later on you'd find out that not only did they fail the ambush, but they'd actually uncovered their location or exposed themselves. So yeah, that's this game. I don't know how into the weeds you want to get with.
Well, so
for
the actual game itself, is it kind of an area control style game for points? What are we looking to try and do in this?
Sure. So for the resistance, you actually want to have a set limit of how many resistance cells you want out on the map by the end of the game. And there's no early victory condition for you at all. Like, you have to last out the duration. For the occupation, it's a little bit different. They have a threshold of how many resources they need to extract from the country, but they also want to make sure that the resistances are going to hit their threshold or their minimum required units on the board. So they are trying to uncover and arrest Maquis and resistant cells, but their primary focus is on extracting these resources through an action-up roundup. So the idea is, as they extract resources, they'll move down on this track. The thing is, to extract resources, you're really kind of taking your eye off the ball as far as the resistance goes, because you can't do both things.
Right.
And the ultimate goal for the occupation is to try to get as much forced labor and materials back to the warfront where they think it belongs, with as little, distraction of, basically what the resistance are running as possible. The problem is, as you are basically extorting all these resources and labor from the country, you're slowly adding to the recruitment pool for the resistance, and it makes it very difficult for you, because now you have more units to keep on top of. You're trying to balance when you're going to do that and how. When resistance units get uncovered, so they have two sides, right? They've got a side that has, it's just like blank, and then they've got another side that will either have the cross of Moran on it, or it'll have Limswar here. So the idea is that when they are uncovered, that's when units are susceptible to arrest. When an arrested unit is arrested, it goes in the disappeared box, and there is no reliable way to ever get that unit back in the game. So loyal units have the cross of Moran, and then these units are actually informants. So when they first come out in your recruitment pool, you have no idea which of your resistance cells are loyal and which of them are informants, and you have no way to check as the resistance. But the occupation has a way to inspect whether or not something is an informant. And then the informant units, once they're exposed, they'll basically operate as an occupation unit for the remainder of the game, and they don't count toward the resistance units. So it's a big problem, because some players get very annoyed that once an informant is exposed, they can't ambush it, they have no way to get rid of it. It just represents basically the informants within their cause who are kind of betraying them. So I find that really fun. That was a really nice little idea to create some tension in that way. And so the game is like pretty tight. It plays out over a total of 9 rounds. Each round is just a single card play. So when players play, they'll have a hand of 2 cards total, 2 events. They place one face down in front of them. They'll both reveal their cards at the same time. Whoever has the higher value just chooses the initiative for that turn. So they'll decide whether they want to go first or second. First the event occurs, then they play the points, and the points give them a menu of actions, and the 2 menus are completely different. And the cost of those actions will be different depending on whether you're activating units in the suit that is matching your card, or if it's outside of that suit. And then we've got like one wild suit that can be used anywhere on the map. But yeah, it's a really tight little game. We've got plenty of time to work on it and kind of work out a lot of the kinks. But this is a great one, and this is one that, like, when my nephews are looking for something to play, I'm like, Dan, your games are so long and boring. And then it's like, well, here's one you can play. It's like
30 minutes,
short and punchy.
Do they enjoy it?
They like this one a lot.
How old are they?
Well, now they're a bit older, but I think my youngest nephew is 16.
Okay.
And he definitely, you can tell, he's like checking the watch after a certain point. Like this needs to wrap up a little bit. We need to get moving. So, I think he appreciates that it's pretty snappy.
We did a written interview with you guys on the blog on this a year ago. I am sure that a lot has changed since that initial interview. But if you want more information, there's some more information out there. So,
Is there anything else that we've got here that we can take a look at? Or is this-
Absolutely.
Let's
Can,
dive in.
Sure. Grab a couple things.
yeah, it is really a nice looking prototype. Yeah, Joe has some very interesting artistic talents. I love his style.
I do like that style, and I think that it's pretty impressive that, you know, when you make a game in a weekend, you're working with someone else who can just like, well, let's just bang out like a quick 40 event cards and like a board and a bunch of unique pieces. We'll just do that in TTS. We can do that in 2 days, right? Yeah. And then, you know, Chris will be like, hey, let's change everything. And then we're like, yeah, we'll still do it. so that kind of confidence is pretty great. And like, I think too, you know, like even when you go into the game jam with like nothing prepared, like I've still got like templates from, you know, like CDGs that I've done in the past and like things like that. So it's just like, in terms of like having the ability to like, for a lot of designers now, I know so many of them are like really good at like graphic design and can like at least get like a prototype that looks pretty sharp. So I think even like when I sent out 1979 to people, they're like, damn, this is done. It's like, no, it's not done. Like,
Yeah,
it's like,
we played a prototype copy of that, and when the final game came out, I was like, oh, because the prototype we played was great, and you're right, like it could have been done.
I mean, someone will print it that way, but
Yeah.
find the publisher for yourself that won't print it the way that you sent it out. I think that's really important. So this is a little guy that I'm working on that's kind of weird.
Did you say kind of weird?
Yeah, it's kind of weird, even by my standards, but you know, I'm trying to be a little bit more reflective of when I call one of my designs weird, because every single time I'm talking to like Emerald Howland or something, like she's like got a hold my beer vibe about weird, like played Field of Cloth and Gold. It's like, yeah, hold my beer. All right, so this one's. You know, I feel like a lot of designers I know have a game that they're working on about the French Revolution. No judgment. But I had this idea. I read a book, a novel called The Gods Will Have Blood, and it was just from the point of view of a young artist who's kind of not very good. He gets appointed as a magistrate for a revolutionary tribunal and uses the position for selfish political gain, and eventually, and he's like a true believer, but you know, it goes off the rails pretty quickly, and a lot of other people end up getting hurt, like they do. So the idea I had for doing a French Revolution game was a little bit different. I wanted to do a game where you would, basically a solitary game where you would play a character like Gamlet, like in the novel, where you would basically preside over a tribunal and like hear cases. And basically the cards, instead of having like a lot of stats and like, you know, cubes and points, the idea is that the cards are only providing you with text prompts about who the accused are and what the charges are being brought against them. And then you would determine from the text prompt what the outcome would be on court legitimacy and your own Jacobin reputation. And so I designed this little game. And basically the idea is that you've got a deck of 24 cards of accused, and all you see is whatever's on top is the accused that stand before your tribunal right now. And you've got mostly red cards, and these are folks who could potentially help your political standing or harm it one way or another. And then you've got 3 blue cards, and these are people who are actually close to you, like near and dear to you as a character. So it's like your paramour here and 2 of your very close buds. But they've also you know, been accused of something, and you're going to find out what the charges are brought against them. So the idea is that at the start of the game, you've got 4 of these guilty red cubes and 3 not guilty cubes, and then they're going to go into like a little draw. And what you're going to do as the player is you're going to read the text prompt for each one of these characters. And after you've kind of reviewed who they are, what the charges are brought against them, you're going to decide whether you find them guilty or not guilty. And then all you need to do is draw a cube that matches your verdict. And you'll draw up to 2 cubes. So if I decide if this guy seems like there's a pretty decent amount of Jacobins that want him gone, I'm going to have to get rid of him. So basically the idea is like, I'm going to find him guilty, but I need to draw at least 1 cube from this bag that's going to match my verdict. So the first one I draw is guilty, we're done here. I can just basically, the discarded are just the discarded people. So we would basically just flip it face down, and then there's 2 different outcomes. There's one, if they're guilty, what we adjust, and then there's not guilty. So in this case, it's kind of like an add momentum, and then increase your reputation 1. Easy peasy.
Nice.
So with momentum, we move this, shift this marker 1 over. Momentum is going to add red cubes to the bag.
Oh.
And I think it's important to note there's a big guillotine there at the top
Yes,
of there.
there is.
Yeah, so these people aren't being treated fairly. They're just being removed of their heads.
So they're not horse around here. So then we would move this up 1 space. So at the end of the game, the objective is you want your Jacobin reputation at the very top, and you just need to make sure that the court legitimacy doesn't fall all the way to the bottom of this track.
Okay.
If it falls to the bottom of this track, the court has no legitimacy, and you will be removed from your position.
And does that happen when your verdict doesn't match what you draw?
Actually, so sometimes you'll draw 2 cubes, and both of them are not your verdict,
Yeah.
and that's what's going to carry the other, basically the other sentence out. But sometimes when charges are really flimsy based on the card prompts, and you get a whiff of that, there's a good chance other people know that charges are very flimsy, or you aren't allowing certain, like so-and-so can just represent themselves, or oh, so-and-so's a lawyer, we cannot let them represent themselves, you know, everything. So anytime the proceedings seem less legitimate, like even less than normal, there's a good chance that legitimacy will go down instead of up. And then unlike most tracks where they'd be parallel to one another, in this case they actually intertwine in the center for a section. So as a result, there will be points where your reputation cannot increase just 1 space because it's capped by what the current legitimacy is. However, if something needs to be lowered on a track, if there's something in that space, you just go to the next.
So it goes down an
spot,
extra space than
an
it would have
extra
done.
space.
Ooh.
So that can make it really difficult. I like making games that you could possibly lose in 15 minutes. That's always a joy to me. Testers, you know, different mileage for that.
Yeah. So what's this one called?
So this is called The
Heads
Gods Will
will
Have
roll.
Blood.
What's it called?
The Gods Will Have Blood. It's
Okay.
off the novel of the same name. So,
Okay, nice.
but yeah, so this is like a project that I've been kind of tinkering around, thinking about, and you know, it kind of, I thought like for a short kind of solitary game, it'd also be interesting to see like, trying to think a little bit more about some games would have a footprint that potentially could have use in a classroom if you wanted to demonstrate it as an exercise. I don't know that this would educate people really that much about the French Revolution, so much as drive certain points home and make them feel bad.
Right.
But that's also kind of my bread and butter. So,
Got it.
What does the blue cube do?
so this blue cube here, if the court of legitimacy ever ends up at the very top of the track, you can add it to the bag, and then this is basically a token you can use for any verdict
wild.
you want. Wild.
Okay.
If the legitimacy is no longer at the top, though, you have to then, once it's pulled, it goes back to the board.
Give us an example of some of the text on the card. I'm not sure it's easy to.
Sure. So this one's
Sorry.
no, that's a great idea. So this is for Jacques-René Hébert, and like it says, Citoyen Hébert is the author of famed Pierre du Chesnay newspaper. Despite his responsibility to his lowbrow audience and past praise of Lafayette, the defendant saw fit to rabble-rouse and sow discontent during recent food shortages, so his extreme and dangerous political followers might seize power. So from that, I'm supposed to figure out what my verdict would be passed. And like, I might get a sense of like, well, he's author of a newspaper, so he might be popular with some people. Is that going to hurt my, like, is that going to harm legitimacy for these proceedings, or will it really help my reputation when we finally get him? So that's like kind of what we're trying to divine from each of these. And then like, some of these texts are based on fictional characters from the book, but we give them a little background of. So what's a good example? So like for a character Like here, we got Jacques Mobile. So here it says, Citoyen Mobile once assaulted my dearest Elodie. Though interrogators could not extract a confession, the court has a notebook detailing his travels abroad. There should be sufficient evidence of Citoyen Mobile voyaging to stir enemies of liberty. Given his aristocratic upbringing, we can provide a network of condemned accomplices. So from this, then you'd have like some sense of like what the outcome, could possibly be.
And how many of these did you go through the whole deck when you're playing a game of this?
Yeah, you have to play through the entire deck without losing. But you only win if you're at the top of the reputation track.
At the very end.
At the very end.
Oh.
So it's possible that it's just like, the luck broke pretty poorly in terms of who these accused were, and sometimes it's just a matter of I made a series of bad choices, and now I'm going to be killed for it.
I was unqualified as a magistrate.
And then the last little touch was, so this momentum keeps getting added to the bag. The moment you find someone not guilty, though, we remove all the momentum from the bag and place it back on the track. That's the only way to break that momentum streak. So sometimes there's someone who you think is like possibly guilty of the charges brought against them, or you just do not like them and you want to see them beheaded. So there's going to be cases where you probably need to find them not guilty just because you need to stave off momentum, because it's going to become impossible to find anyone not guilty later. And as I said, there's like 3 people who are close to your protagonist that you don't want to get killed, because when they get killed, they remove white cubes from the bag, and there's like a hardening of the heart. And if you run out of white cubes to remove, you also lose that way. I think the key to good solitaire gaming is always having many ways to lose and one way to win that just looks like you cannot be serious.
It shouldn't be too easy for sure.
Never be too easy. And then if all the momentum is in the bag at any point, then we kind of proceed to a quaint little custom from 1793. They start doing batch cases. So what we do is we split the remaining deck into 2 stacks, and then you're going to assign one verdict
to everybody
for both of them, and then we'll flip over the 2 cards. You can resolve the effects in any order, but you have to resolve all of the effects for your batch cases. And I seen a few tests, gotten some good reports. No one's ever won. It's possible, but I would not hold my breath. So, yeah.
So is this a game that, like, say, a Dietz Foundation might be interested in because of the connection with education and school?
Possibly, because something could actually fit in the classroom. Full disclosure, it's actually something that I've also brought to Hollenspiel for them to look at and things like that. But again, the MMO might be like, go weirder, make it weirder. But I trust RMA's from a lot of these things. They release really interesting stuff, and so it's pretty cool. But yeah, so this is my most recent project.
Cool. And did you make this? Because this is great looking already. This is like a prototype that you would say, "Here, printer, this is finished."
Pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I probably don't need to spend as much money on cardstock as I do, but it's really light and finished.
You love it.
But yeah, I try to make them look as nice as possible, because when I hand them off to testers, I want them to actually get played. And also I found too, a long time ago at events, you'd be on a table competing for the players' time as they walk by. Yeah. So the more together and complete the game looks, the better. And so it's just been really wild. I remember one of the first GMT warehouses I went to, I was there pitching No Motherland Without, and Ananda Gupta's at another table with Imperial Struggle. And Imperial Struggle at that time is some Magic the Gathering cards with little slips of paper, and they just cut out triangles. It looked like a prison craft project. Just objectively whoa. And then I've got my old game with the wood pieces and everything on it. And it's just kind of one of those things where I think it really depends on where you're at in your design career, and also where you seek tests, right? If it's kind of a closed-knit group, you've got your players, many of them will be understanding, and they won't demand that the prototype looks really mint. Mine do. Mine are very, and then they'll also accuse me of cheating at my own game.
Nice.
Damn it, for not doing well. But I think that for the most part, they want to see a game that looks a little bit more like a finished product, even if it's not the finished product. So, so this is my little guy, and
Very
What
cool.
else we got? This one, I started working on in January. I'm pretty proud of it. It's been coming together pretty fast. This is one that I've been pitching actively.
Oh, Dune.
Oh, dude, yeah.
Everyone gets their hopes up. This Dune box has been such a big mistake. Because it's just like, I see in their eyes they would rather be playing Dune. I also would rather be playing Dune. I get it. Dune's delightful. So this game is called Blood and Treasure.
Blood and Treasure.
Big on blood this year. So the idea is each player represents U.S. private contractor during the U.S.-Afghan war. And so the idea is that you are trying to amass the most obligations built in for certain contracts that are kind of adjacent to like mission support tasks. So for your firm, this is kind of a worker placement type of game with bidding. But basically what I want to do is I was trying to think of ways to kind of I wanted to see if I could create like a game. First of all, get away from like doing CDGs for a little bit, but I wanted to see if I could create something that would have like a historical context, but use familiar Euro mechanisms that people would recognize, but then make it extremely thematic in terms of like how you play. So even though the game still has cards, the cards actually represent contract work that you'd be obtaining. So the contracts in the market are something that we'd lay out, and they cover like a variety of specialties, like 6 different specialties. So some of them might be
energy,
security, things like that. Mm-hmm. And so the idea was that they would represent the type of work that players would be competing to get. And then essentially, even though there's information on the cards that's important to gameplay, most of the text is essentially flavor text on what kind of work was being done with this project, and then what historically happened to this specific project. So it's like really easy to come up with flavor text because I'm reading through special investigator audits, because it's a fun thing to do on New Year's Eve. I'm like reading through these special investigator audits of this contract work to see what the outcome was of the various projects.
A look into the mind of Dan Bullock, what he does on New Year's Eve.
I don't know what you're reading on New Year's Eve. Some people like to take stock of their lives. I just like to fix myself a little drink and read some government audits. So the idea is that players basically representing these firms, they're going to have pieces, these are like kind of contracted pieces, and we use chess pieces for them. And the idea is that when there's going to be market contracts, and these are the contracts that various firms are going to be competing against one another to get. And so when they do that, they place their piece in this little row underneath the given card, but then they're also going to place a bid. They have a little handful of bid cards, and they place their bids face down. And the idea is that for this work, the lowest bid is going to take that work. But we're also tracking the reputation of each of the firms. Reputation is going to improve over time if you complete projects. And it's going to degrade over time if you get inspected and you haven't been completing projects. So as a result, you're kind of maintaining a tableau of work over the course of the game, but you'll get awarded obligations or victory points the moment you win the contract. So once you've won the contract, most of your incentive is to get more contracts.
Not necessarily finish them.
Not necessarily finish them, but you want a little bit. You want a little bit of reputation, but too much reputation is almost like not that
useless.
It's not gonna be something you can monetize.
So the chess pieces is that going to be a final component, you think? Because I think it's brilliant.
I want them desperately to be a final component.
I think it's brilliant.
But I do worry that publishers will look at that and be like, why does it always have to be expensive? Why can't it?
I just think that's really
And how many players does this play?
Up to 5,
Oh, wow.
actually. And so right now I'm using like clay poker chips and like kind of the works for everything, like little mini cards for the bids and everything.
This looks fantastically interesting. I'm going to be
Yes.
honest. Even just with your 30-second explanation, I'm salivating, wanting to try it.
It's interesting because even though like my target was trying to get folks who are more Omni gamers and Euro players to play it, because it's mostly back in Milwaukee, most of the folks I cast with and play with, that's kind of the stuff that they enjoy. and less kind of war games. But a lot of my war game people like love this design.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
they really
there's a
got
pretty
into it.
intense topic as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if all like the farming Euro gamers are like, "Oof, this is heavy."
Well, it's another side of the conflict simulation world, right?
Absolutely.
This is the guys that are going in and cleaning up the stuff that you just did on the game board, and it's a different type of conflict, right? It's
Yeah.
just, to me, it's fascinating.
I really wanted to kind of, specific to U.S.-Afghan war in part because the volume of private contractors that were sent to do mission support work just skyrocketed during that period. In part because, as we're in Afghanistan with the invasion of Iraq, suddenly all the combat-ready troops get moved to Iraq, and then now you've got a whole wide base of tasks that need to be outsourced to somebody. So the two countries couldn't be more different, really, because Iraq has a middle class and a lot of infrastructure that could be improved or repaired. And for Afghanistan, a lot of the counterinsurgency purposes behind some of this mission support work relied on improving infrastructure that wasn't really there. So when you're talking about improving a power grid in large swaths of the country, it means building a power grid and then implementing it in place. And that also meant that so these contracts, they highlight a couple things. So each contract has on it an indication of likelihood of insurgent violence that will disrupt progress on the project, the likelihood that it will be inspected, and then these little squares indicate how much progress it takes to complete them. So when we're placing our contractors out on the board, contractors can also be placed in projects in our tableau, and that's how we make progress to complete them. And then pawns are kind of the starting piece that everyone has, but then we can purchase with obligations pieces through the lobby action that are actually a little bit better than other things. So this one is normally kind of in the vein of the first dominant species. You'll place all of your contractors, and then at the end you resolve in a set order each of these actions.
Man, we gotta play this.
You love that, yeah.
And then you've got your queen piece, which is kind of your most expensive piece that each firm has. But when you place it out on the board, that allows you to resolve that action right away, as opposed to waiting till later. And in addition to these pieces can knock out the smaller pieces. I try to use even pieces that vary in height. If people are really unfamiliar with chess, they'll just know that the taller piece is going to be able to bump out the shorter piece. So you're kind of set there. And then one last thing with this game, without getting into the full explanation, is so there's more than one type of contract. So you've got market contracts that firms are competing for, but the crown jewel here on the board are these sole source contracts. So for those contracts, they operate a little differently. Players don't bid on them. You would just place your contractor right on the contract. But they have a prerequisite in reputation that you need to have in order to be able to place there. And you can fudge it a little bit if you've completed a number of projects that are in the same vein. So I'm not a very reputable firm, but I do a lot of security work, and this is security sole source. So maybe because of my past fulfilled security work, it'll be just enough to get me to take this contract. To get that, and then I do have little event cards that just screw with other players. But basically, they've got two sides. There's a white side that's a benefit, and a red side that's just mean to everyone else.
So do you get a choice of I'd like a good thing or I'd like to screw everyone?
So the things that are out in the offer are the white benefit side, and the thing on top of the event deck right then is red. So some players will just fight for it to block it so someone else. I don't want anyone to do this, but if someone has to do it, I have to do it because I am incredibly mean. And so that's kind of the idea of having that kind of element.
So one thing I was just kind of looking at, trying to understand the game with your 30-second. So this has a very low likelihood of ever being inspected, right?
Right.
But it also requires 3 investment. So I have very little motivation to do this one. This one's 2. Heck, this one's even better. It's a 1.
Yeah.
And it's going to get inspected most likely, so I'd want to make sure to complete this one.
Right. So in terms
these
of
are probably worth more VP, but
it's about like what kind of work can I put in my Tableau that won't screw me during inspections. So the way the inspections work is at the start of the game, there's only 3 inspectors, and over the course of the game, as the war presses on, with the volume of work exploding, there's going to be a few more inspectors, but it'll never be enough to inspect everything on the table, right?
That's what I'm saying. It's kind of like a calculated decision about,
Yes.
I want to complete these kind of jobs. Because
Right.
I might get inspected, but that's fascinating to me. That's just interesting. Not that I'm a government person, but I'm a ethically high government person. I would never do anything like that. But fascinating, really interesting.
Well, the point I think of the commentary was really to like just kind of highlight like where incentives for these firms aligned with the people who are hiring them to do the work, and when maybe for DoD, USAID, it's like, right now our incentives are kind of opposed to each other because anywhere if I have someone working at like Subway with me, if they think they're going to get shot at making sandwiches, they don't want to show up to work as much. You know what I mean? It's like, or they're going to be ducking behind the like sneeze guard, like they're going to be doing something to try to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the decisions aren't necessarily just like kind of craven decisions made entirely about greed. Some of it is about self-preservation. Sometimes it's a matter of like, I don't think this project can actually be fulfilled before we withdraw. So why am I going to put great risk and expose like my contractors to this kind of danger? And also, I think when we're thinking about private contractors, a lot of people think of the security end of it. There are so many different types of like projects that can be done, like things from talking about like drip irrigation systems and orchards, trying to find value chains for livestock to woo people away from growing opium. And then there's things like just like, hey, I'm going to train folks how to pilot these types of helicopters, or I'm delivering food to vending machines and forward operating bases. All these people don't want to be shot at. It's like the unifying thing that they've got.
The thing they all have in common.
Yeah, they all have in common.
I want to make money, but I don't want to be shot at.
I don't want to be shot at. Yeah, and so there's like
Interesting.
there's that element of that work, but there's also the matter of like there's definitely a lot of bad actors who are going to sense that if my work isn't being inspected, the quality of work that needs to be done here might not be that important. And also, if withdrawal feels imminent, they may not make that much of a priority on finishing it.
Blood and Treasure is this one.
Yeah, the subtitle is A Game About the US-Afghan War and Those That Would Profit From It, which probably tells you everything about this game. So how long would a game of this typically take to play?
Usually about 2 hours, I would say. It kind of depends. I think with the full 5, it's definitely pressing 2 hours for sure.
And I presume you want to play it with that many people, so there's a bit of fighting over the markets and stuff.
Yeah, it does. So it scales up in terms of what the market size is, but I did create kind of an AI like Globo firm thing where we just had like a die that could place bids randomly on like some of the contract cards, and without it being a flowchart and it just being like this brainless AI that you can resolve in 10 seconds, it was still really nice because it created a tension where
Where's it going to go?
where's it going to go? Because before, firms start out with a specialty, like I might be in energy and you might be in security. So at the very start of the game, we can't bid on the same projects, but over time, I can form subsidiaries and gain like more specialties that I can fulfill contracts for. But Global Firm just does everything, can essentially go over it. So you can't ever feel confident that just by putting the max bid on a card, well, I'm definitely getting this. Because you always had to worry that now this AI is going to come and just like lowball you a little bit. So I like that element of it, but I do think that the game is so knifey at 5. Like it's just it's really cutthroat.
Fantastic. Who have you shopped this one to?
I've been looking around a little bit. This one, I haven't settled on anybody yet. I did talk to a couple of these Euro publishers who were like, we think the game is really good, but could you retheme it? And
No,
yeah, I was
that's
like,
the point.
no, I'm really pretty in love with the theme,
That's
actually.
the point here. That's funny.
It's funny, like you start out and you're like, can you? You think that people are going to ask you, like, can you just strip mechanics away? Like I know I pitched No Motherland Without. It had the generation map on it.
Yeah.
And a number of publishers were like,
Get rid of that part.
this needs to go. because this creeps me out and I don't like it. And it's like, I'm okay with you feeling something.
Yeah, like that game specifically, you're supposed to.
Yeah, that's what it's about.
And at the same time too, it's like as a player, if someone's like telling you that they wouldn't be comfortable playing that, that's still valid. It's just I wasn't comfortable taking a thing out of a game, especially for a first design. It's really tough, guys, because like you have like your playtest group, and sometimes your playtest group when you're starting is like 5 people. But for that game, when I was pitching it, like I had gotten like about 30 face-to-face testers to like try it and give me substantial feedback. And when the thing that they all point to as their favorite thing is like what the publisher's pointing to as their least favorite thing, it seems like as the designer you're just conceited, but really it's just like you're trying to weigh which voice you're going to listen to, and I think ultimately you're going to side with the players who play it.
You should anyway. Yeah.
Well, they're the ones that are going to buy it. And
Right.
I guess someone's got to buy it to publish it, but they're the ones that are going to play it. Yeah, this looks fascinating. I'm going to say this is one of the better games I've seen this week already. So,
Awesome.
and haven't even played it, but this is something I would enjoy, and I think you would enjoy. And
Oh,
would enjoy.
without a doubt.
And then my last thing is a monstrosity.
It's a monstrosity.
We're all down for a monstrosity.
I love that.
I want to hold the board up just so people get a little better look at that. It's so fascinating. Yeah, that's a great subtitle. Those who would profit from it.
So, I have been working on an Age of Sail game for a couple years. I started it before pandemic. Miracle with pandemic is everything ends up finished eventually. The time is always found, which is great. So, for that one, Age of Sail has enough of an uphill battle getting published, so I would never put it in a Dune box per se. But basically, what I've got is I printed it out on a 3-foot by 4-foot canvas map.
Okay.
You know, you could just do paper. I don't know if you realize this. You could just do paper.
So I work at a medical university.
Okay.
And they do their scientific posters before our conferences.
Yeah.
And so then it's just like it's like when I go to the liquor store and I think I'm buying one beer, and then it just gets craftier and craftier and more expensive. But it's like you get 24 of these for this, or you can get 10, or you get 4 for like 23. It's like I'll get 4 for 23. That sounds really good. I'm just not going to share. And so it's sort of similar with this experience where I'm working on this map and I have the dimensions, and I thought they were just going to print it out on paper. And the first time they did one, they're like, well, we can do it on a like fabric blend. And it's like, how much is it? How much more is it? They're like, $1, $2. It's like,
Do
then
it.
I'd want to do that, obviously.
Yeah.
So I printed it. It's like, no, everything needs to be printed on this. It's just like, so I thought they were only getting $2 out of me over the course of time. They've gotten much more. So, but basically, the idea for this game was I wanted to create an Age of Sail to be playable on a weeknight, that type of thing, like just like 3 hours. And I've never been able to get that to happen with throwing colors. Wooden ships a little bit, but those boarding actions are pretty swingy. So I mean, like when everyone gets drunk enough and then they attempt enough boarding actions, the game is essentially over because that thing swings like a saloon door the moment you really assert yourself. But so the idea for this is it's a grid system that you're kind of operating with your vessels. And
I feel like I need to get some tent stakes and poles and roll.
and though it is cloth, we have found it's not very absorbent. So when you spill beer,
It's good.
It pools there, but I feel like the ship should be getting wet. It's probably fine. But the idea is that
This one's called Cannons and Shot.
so this is actually broadside to broadside. This is an old board that I'm keeping in a Game of Thrones box for some reason. So this is actually the newer board, but this one has like some of the wind indications and things like that. So the idea was I wanted to have something where you could scale it from doing kind of like a really short kind of 30-minute scenario that's a chase on a map, do a tiny like 1-hour scenario where it'd be like 2 ships going after, say, convoy, like, you know, 2 British ships after a French convoy. These were all, by the way, during the American Revolution. And then one kind of granddaddy scenario, which is the Battle of Virginia Capes. So it's 19 ships against 22. And so it's like, well, how on earth am I going to get 19 and 22 ships on this board? And so the idea I had was, what if we just had like part of the engagement, like what's actually going to occur on the map, where we can see, say, the vanguard of two fleets, like kind of mass on one another, and then as they go off the map, there's more ships coming on, but it's always centered on that kind of first engagement of what happens. So as a result, the ships that are in the rear of both sides are unlikely to fire upon one another or do much of anything. But that's also pretty true to how these historical standards work out. So the idea was I basically made these little ship tokens, put on these little domino-sized things. So in each grid space, there's like various positions you can have them in, and it's going to be related to wind. And then there's like kind of a wind indicator that basically tells you whether the wind is coming from, say, northeast or east wind, and that'll determine what the modifiers are for your movement. But each ship has its own set kind of like maneuver based on, and all these ships have their own, so every vessel has its own card, and then the cards are unique to that class of ship, and then they've got command ratings that are unique based on who's commanding them. But the idea is they're on dry erase cards, so what you'll do is you would just write damage directly onto the card, and the damage is kept secret during engagements in most cases. So the idea is that through the gun smoke you wouldn't necessarily be able to see exactly what quality of shot you're landing on your opponent, but the idea is that every time you're inflicting damage, you're inflicting it to a general area of the ship, like say the lower hull, the upper hull, the rigging. But then the defender is the one who's actually, with their little marker, marking off areas that they're going to damage. And that's going to indicate how it hinders your maneuver, whether or not it's going to be something that can eventually cause like your gunnery to be a little off. And the idea is that they are always staring in the face exactly how many more hits they have before the jig is going to be up, and they have to basically remove themselves from the battle. And because that information is hidden, there's a little bit of stress. Like they're going to prioritize, in some cases, damaging different locations over others. So it's a game where you're rolling dice to determine how much damage is going to be done based on the number of guns that your ship has. But the idea is that as you're allocating damage, each hit location can absorb a certain amount of damage as you check it. So you always want to absorb the maximum amount before moving on to the next location. And then once, say, a lower hull has taken as much damage as it can and can't absorb anymore, then the ship would sink. For rigging, it's just going to be in the water. Yeah. And for upper hull, really all you've done is basically killed a lot of crew, but the ship is still basically seaworthy. It's just people are, you basically just shoot a free to operate things, and also it's just like compounds on the damage that can be done to rigging and other things, because upper hull is kind of where all these things come in. But the idea was that this way there didn't need to be like any kind of chromy rules about how damage occurs, or like how it would affect the ship when it's done to this versus that. I could put everything on a card, they'd be able to mark it off, and they're always looking at it as a reference. So the only chromy thing I've got here is how wind is going to work. And the idea is basically ships have a built-in amount of maneuver, and they can advance to a space for like a base of 2, they can turn for a base of 1, and I just wanted to keep the system very clean, so that way players don't have to worry about reaction moves and things like that. So you give up a little bit of control and like some of the cool command restraints that normally come in like a sail. But at the same time, it kept the game like very playable. I still wanted players basically to leave the game with the sense of, here's what weather gauge is, here's why you would think it's important. Hey, wasn't that sweet when they had to advance into the wind while you shot at them a bunch?
Yeah.
I would hope nobody needs the here's what raking is and why it's good. I think we know that by now, but just in case, I think this could.
So we recently played Captaincy. I mean, it was 6 months ago, but that was fascinating how the wind became such a huge part of your decisions and really provided you with your number of actions. So if you're going against the wind, you had fewer action points in essence.
Yeah,
with the wind, you could do whatever the hell you wanted. And it was very interesting. So I enjoyed that system. I don't know if you've played that from Legion War.
I have it. That's Mike Nagel's one with Legion, right?
Yeah.
I have not.
And that is just a dueling game.
It's ship on ship, so it's literally One ship, and we loved it. We played it a couple and just absolutely loved it.
I just like Age of Sail's fun because you have to worry about your maneuvering so different from like mechanized warfare. I drive my tank, right?
Yeah.
And so it's cool to consider that, but kind of like you said, some of the other ones take so long or they're so complicated, and it's like. So looking for something that's much more eminently playable, if that's very exciting.
Yeah. I think that the biggest thing too is like kind of want with Age of Sail, most folks I know like they wanted a game that kind of lit their appetite, and then they would go into the heavier Age of Sail.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and I think because I know a lot of people who are really into Age of Sail now who got into it originally from like Sails of Glory and things like that. But just like it's like a smaller, more manageable game as an entry point, and then later on it's like, oh, now I can play this.
Yeah, because it's I want to sail my ship, I want to shoot me cannons, right? That's where it all starts. That's what we all want to do. But then, like, the more you're into it, you're like, ooh, maybe a little bit more detail, or ooh, this particular engagement, well, only one game in the world has that one, so you get into that kind of history part of it as well.
Did you do this graphic design?
Yeah.
That's really nice. And that's the name of the game, Broadside to Broadside.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, when you're playing the big scenario with 22 guys, do you have 22 of these cards that you're trying to manage?
So because there's only so many, at the very start of that battle, it's only the Vanguard for each fleet is out. So as a result, like each side has about 6 or 7 ships out on the board. So you'll have 6 or 7 in your hand. Is you're able to, so you have options during the engagement to either, you can get them off the map, but the most common way is that you're basically going to be able to withdraw behind your lines. And once you withdraw in that way, then your card is removed. So your opponent doesn't get credit for sinking it or disabling it. And the idea is I wanted to highlight a little bit for that particular engagement. For Virginia Capes, it's this idea of ships that sank probably shouldn't have been in the battle to begin with, sort of thing. With apt names like Terrible and whatnot. But the idea was like you had these ships that were in varying states because the French brought their fleet up from the Caribbean, and there was a sense of the Brits knew that they were coming, but they didn't know whether they were going to go to New York or outside Chesapeake. And so when they show up, they've got like all these cool glass bottom ships that are in really good condition, and the fleet that was hanging out in New York was like kind of iffy. Like half of it was just not that great. And then when they approached the mouth of the Chesapeake, they see that it's basically blockaded by French ships. And they're like, oh crap, they're here. They're here already. And their immediate response was to reverse their line of battle, so that way they could go out and meet them. Because the idea is if you're in the Vanguard, I'm the Vanguard, we're doing this weird diagonal thing. We both want to diagonally come in and not get shot at until the last minute. So while they're like kind of creeping in like that, the idea is if they can reverse their line, they'll be a little bit ahead of the French fleet when it comes out to meet them. And if you have to go through this sort of procession of Vanguard guns, you're just going to get drilled. So they wanted to be in the lead so they could basically inflict that kind of damage on the British fleet as it arrived. The problem was that their best ships ended up then in the back of the line, and a lot of their most vulnerable ended up in the front. So yeah, the idea was, to me, like just having like an element where, because the fleet is a lot of ships and a lot of cards, you wouldn't want to control all of it at once. So you try to keep ways where really we keep the burden of that minimized. It's great in Tabletop Simulator because everything just levitates in front of you, and it's like perfect row of ships. You can have as many of them out as you want, but when you actually physically have them in the hand, I found players like just kind of kept them face down and spread them out on their side of the table, which, table space is a premium when you print maps this big, but I mean, I could make it smaller. I could drive with my feet. I don't. But, it's the wrong way to do anything.
Wow, this looks fascinating too. Broadside to Broadside.
Broadside to Broadside.
Very well named too.
Yeah, so...
how many of the different scenarios do you think this one will have?
I think
or engagements?
for this one, I'm probably planning on 3, and I'm really doing the scenarios based on length types.
So short one, medium one, and a long one.
Yeah, and I personally, and I also wanted the long to still be playable on.
Got it.
And I know a lot of the Age of Sail games, a lot of games in general, that have here's the map comes with 20 different scenarios, 25 different scenarios, personally, as a player with my game collection swelling at all times, I'm just never going to come back to a game that many times. I would rather just have like a system where here's the 3 that are tight and are actually balanced.
Yeah.
Let's play these 3, and then also it's easier to guide new players toward like, what do you want to try? It's like, well, if you're just learning it, like maybe the shortest scenario would be the one where you figure things out and your mistakes are less punishing.
Yeah.
I don't learn that way. I always go to the biggest, meatiest
Jumping
thing,
deep into the pool.
get punished, a little resentful, and then I come back to it and play the full-size scenario again. But
Who have you presented this one to?
this one, a couple publishers are taking a look at it. I think that this one's still being shopped around in part. I think Age of Sail is really difficult to find.
That can be a tough
It's
sell.
a tough sell. So for this one, I'm kind of still hopeful that I'll be able to find something. This is something I've kind of looked into potentially self-publishing if I couldn't find anyone.
Okay.
Just because I could do it kind of in a boutique rollout where it would just be do the giant map, do everything basically the same quality as the prototype that I've got right now, but then just cap it at like, there's only 100 of these, and then I'm never going to
Got it.
And I think but yeah, the fulfillment is usually what scares a lot of people from wanting to do any of the kind of like game found Kickstarter stuff.
Yeah.
It's just a lot.
Well, and when you're shipping a big roll-up man on top of all this stuff,
Yeah.
That's
You know,
intense.
so the thing is, like, I remember when Legion was selling Mori Wars, Japanese game, that they had the option
that
for that map where you could unroll, like have it rolled
Yeah.
up. It's like, well, yeah, I don't want that thing ever to be creased.
Yeah.
It's like the attitude. I'm like, well, we send it in a giant tube. And I don't care what that costs. Just get that to me right away. Yeah.
Well, this has been fascinating, Dan. Really appreciate it.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
thanks for-
appreciate you showing us all these. A lot of amazing stuff to look forward to. Sure.
Thanks for checking it out. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So I appreciate you very much for tuning in. I'm Alexander from PlayerSaid.com.
And I'm Grant.